Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? We had a little audio issue today. Can you hear me all right? And we have people in Twin Falls and Idaho Falls and Meridian as well. Can you all hear me? Just wave if you can.
We can hear you in Meridian.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I certainly appreciate you all joining us today to talk about some of the updates that Academic Affairs has that we have already shared with Faculty Senate, and also with the chairs and directors. We had a chairs and directors breakfast last week and shared a lot of this information there. Some of this is additional information that we did not have in those presentations because we had questions that came up in those venues and we've added that material. We have quite a bit to cover here, and so I have to apologize for A, the fact that we have so much to cover, and B, that we did not have a faculty assembly last semester. That is entirely because my schedule was altered. At first we had a scheduled event that we rescheduled due to the unfortunate passing of Dawn Immel and her service, which corresponded with that date. And then I had a death in my own family shortly after that, that also altered my schedule for most of October and into November. And we had a board meeting fall the week before the end of the term, which is a little bit unusual as well. So I apologize for that. As a result, we have quite a bit to cover here. We have had some questions in advance, and I can say a little bit about those here. I will cover quite a bit of that here. But I also have a RISE investigation update, and essentially that process has been taken over for the institution by our legal counsel's office. And so questions about the institution's response to them should be referred to our Office of Legal Counsel, Joanne Harasi-Stacy. And the investigation itself is still under the purview of our internal auditor, who I should tell you is willing to meet at any...
Oh, I guess mine's blocked.
A little audio challenge here today, but our internal auditor has told me he's willing to talk to you all and to come to meetings as well. And so if you are interested in that, I can certainly share that with him. I wanted to start a little point of personal privilege here, revert to my role as a historian for a moment, because so much of what we are covering today and so much of what has been happening in higher education lately, and really in the last couple of years, has been related to external pressures. And those are increasing. And we certainly feel it on campus. We certainly feel it in my office. This is a time of disruption in our industry in many ways. But it's not new. It's not a new disruption. It's been going on for a while. To give you an idea of how much higher ed has changed, though, we have made a lot of progress, depending, of course, on what you're measuring, but certainly made a lot of progress in terms of access and attainment. And you can see those numbers here. In 1940, just about 50% of the American population had only an 8th grade education, had not graduated from high school. So this is a pretty dramatic difference that we have today, with the majority of Americans graduating from high school. In 1940, the percent of Americans 25 and older had, with a 4-year college degree, 6% of the male population of the U.S. and 4% of the female population of the U.S., which is actually a little surprising. You think that that variance would be greater, and it isn't greater because the total attainment is so small for the population as a whole in 1940. By 2017, we see pretty dramatic changes in these numbers, and maybe not as dramatic as we'd like to see, but dramatic nonetheless. The percent of Americans with any post-secondary credential, and this is not an apples-to-apples statistic here because the Department of Education was only tracking four-year degrees in that first statistic in 1940. But this second one that you see here, in 2017, the 45.8% of the US population that over 25 with some post-secondary credential, that counts all credentials, certificates, associate degrees, and four-year degrees. If you break it out by four-year degree, it's just over 20%, just over 20% of the US population. So if our progress has been great, why is it that so much of what is in the media right now and is in our external committee meetings and all of the places that we interact with the public, why is so much of that narrative about what higher ed is failing to do? And why the disconnect here? We certainly have seen significant gains in diversity as well. And I should say, 1940, the college population was not diverse, and neither was the college faculty, which would have been almost exclusively white and male in 1940. So we've seen pretty significant changes in diversity in that time period as well. So why the narrative about the pressure for the additional attainment? You know, what's going on here? This is a historical progression, and essentially what's happening is that the forces that supported the growth of higher ed in previous periods of change are different today than they were in those previous periods. This is an oversimplification, but in 1862, the forces that supported the development of free public education, which really came about with the Morrill Act in 1862, were very much a part of the mid-19th century effort to grow the middle class. It's a conscientious, union-driven, I should say, northern effort. We're in the middle of the Civil War in 1862, when both the Homestead Act and the Morrill Act are passed. They're twins, essentially. And the purpose of those is to grow the middle class in opposition to the slave-holding gentry, land-holding gentry. It was an anti-privilege law, both of those. The Morrill Act created the land grant system in the U.S. It created the system of land grant institutions that we have today, and it also provided federal funding for vocational education, which at the time was considered pretty much anything that fell outside of classical education. In other words, the humanities and even the sciences are considered to be vocational in the middle of the 19th century. So anything other than the classic languages and the humanities would have fallen under vocational education at that time. So what we're seeing with the land grant institutions is a real expansion of engineering, science, agriculture. By 1944, this is a big jump, obviously, we have another really dramatic change that impacts higher ed, and that's the first GI Bill. And that's the one that created the system that we have today. Institutions responding to that really large number of veterans that came to higher ed, about 2.2 million veterans in years just after the Second World War came to US campuses, and it resulted in really dramatic expansion of programs, of faculty, and of institutions. And certainly we still have that structure largely today that's created post-World War II. But by 2006, we're seeing really dramatic changes in demand and in the way that the American population wants to access higher education, already in 2006. And in fact, the last year that the traditional disciplines, like the humanities and traditional sciences, accounted for the majority of the majors nationally was early 70s, the early 1970s. So that transition's been happening for a long time. Certainly in 2006, the reason this is a big turning point is because it's the year of the Spellings report, the Department of Education's report on the status of higher ed, and its argument that higher ed needed to become more accountable has pretty much reverberated down to where we are today. And it changes the argument, it changes the conversation about what institutions should be doing at the federal level. So with that basis, certainly a lot of the pressures that we see today are the result of this concern culturally that the middle class is losing ground and that higher ed hasn't been that pathway to the middle class for all of the 20th century, certainly. And there is no more effective engine for middle class growth in higher education. And in the 21st century, there's a concern in our constituencies that's becoming increasingly unattainable. And just to give you an idea of the kinds of work that's being done in the nonprofits just in our region, this is United Way data. Our United Way partners have done an analysis not just of poverty rates in our region, but also what they call ALICE rates, asset limited income constrained, but employed. So these are employed people who do not qualify necessarily for federal aid, but who are living very close to the border in terms of providing for necessities for their families. That number for Pocatello is 38%, according to our United Way local branch. And in Idaho Falls, it's 34%. And Twin, it was 40%, which I think was surprising to a lot of people because there's an idea that the growth of wages in the Minnecaja area and also in Twin Falls, Magic Valley has impacted favorably those poverty rates, but we're not really seeing that with that number in Twin Falls. And then Boise as a point of comparison here at 32%. Still above the national average. So really wanted to just give that an overview of the kinds of external pressures that are driving a lot of what you're going to see here in this update. But I did want to give you some progress updates on things that we're tracking that have shown change, positive change in the last few years. Of course, we're very excited about the fact that our undergraduate resident incoming new student enrollment was up, Idaho residents up 164 at the end of the fall term. And that's due in large part to some really concerted efforts by our colleges and our departments and our enrollment management unit. That's pretty significant difference, 13% in that cohort. That's good news because as we grow the cohorts over time, we have about 7 cohorts at any given time in our pipeline. And as you know, the top 3 right now are all small historically. They're historically small cohorts. And as a result, they show until they're through our system, they will show as being lower than the previous year. If we grow consistently, did I do that? I don't think I have that kind of control with this. If we grow consistently though with every incoming year, we will certainly see enrollment growth. And that's our goal. And Scott will talk about that, maybe, if we can get your slide for you. Maybe I did something. Oh, I did. Wow, I didn't even know that was an option.
You do have that kind of power.
I do have that kind of power. It's pretty exciting, actually. So we're excited about that. Our student population is increasingly diverse, which is also a very good thing. You know, certainly in the American West, there is no way to make our attainment goals or to increase enrollment without diversifying our student population. It simply is not possible demographically. And so we're seeing that change, which we're happy about. Just in the last term, the change in Native American students, which had declined for a couple of terms, is up again. Very happy about that. Hispanic student enrollment is dramatically changing over time, certainly a reflection of our demographic, but certainly a reflection too of some efforts that we're making to reach that student population, up 88% since 2010. And then we're also seeing better student outcomes for specific student populations that we have been targeting. Undergrad degree-seeking Idaho students have certainly started to improve in retention and in degree attainment. And one example of that is that our Idaho degree-seeking resident students are taking more credit hours and now than they were taking, and which should lead to fewer years to degree, less time to degree. Some of this is due to very concerted effort in the, oh, I think I did it again. Bottom button. There we go. Very concerted effort in our Student Success Center that has been targeting at-risk student populations with the Bridge to College program. This was also funded by the state legislature that is making a difference in the student population. And here you just see the expansion of that Bridge program over time. The legislature and the state board are interested in scaling this program statewide. It was one of the recommendations in the higher ed committee's higher ed task force recommendations to scale Bridge programs statewide, and so that's why I'm just showing that to you. All right, Scott, you're up. We're gonna talk to you a little bit about enrollment management changes and things that are happening in enrollment management.
Thanks, I appreciate the opportunity to come present some of the things that we're doing in enrollment management. A lot of times people look at enrollment management and they figure that it's just admissions. Not only do they think that it's just admissions, but oftentimes they think it's only half of admissions, which is the recruiting end of admissions. So I've actually put together a few bullet points to talk just a little bit about some of the things that we're doing across enrollment management to hopefully support the students that we have and to gain more students. So first and foremost, I'm not afraid that if I make a change and it doesn't work, to go ahead and break it a different way the next year. And so we made some adjustments. We wanted to impact the advising processes in a positive fashion. And so we realigned some duties. We went on for about a year, weren't quite seeing all the changes that we want. So we shuffled things a little bit again and had a focus on how do we transition students from coming through the admissions process into our first year transition process, which is a more intensive support for our freshman students, and then transition them into being sophomores and on to being advised in the colleges and by the programs themselves. So we've done that. I believe that we had a team from admissions, first year transition, and the central academic advising office went out and met. I believe they're done with each of the colleges. I think they finished that up before the break. But we have done that, and so you should have had more information. If you do have any questions regarding that specifically, Joanne Hertz has had her title change from the Director of Central Academic Advising to the Director of Advising. Part of that is the intent that we have room to improve on the coordination of information, the communication of advising information across campus. We also need a resource that those those employees that are helping advise students, should they come up in a situation where they need some support, some guidance, have a resource in Joanne and her staff to be able to get some assistance. Along with that, and this is one of those ones that I just couldn't decide whether to put this on the slide or not, and that's because I think it's a far bigger deal than it seems like. But we had direct admissions and what's called Apply Idaho, which is the common application that were sort of handed to us down through some state initiatives. I have no problem with the background and the whys that we're going forward with these programs, and I'm fully supportive of them. However, it really made life difficult for the admission side, not the recruiting side, but the folks that have to put together all the forms and processes that support the students coming in. It basically meant that we had counselors and statewide transition coordinators, not ISU people, but out around the state, giving conflicting information about how students go into public education, public higher education. You have to remember that this was also the second pass at our constituent relations manual or module, which is our CRM program that helps us guide our communication to the students as they come in, which there were technical issues last year. So going into roughly late October, I was pretty much panicked that if we had the CRM program difficulties along with the additional struggles of some of these mandates, that we wouldn't be able to effectively get students enrolled from the time they apply to the completed admission process in a timely fashion, which is critical in admissions. I'm happy to say that our panic played out, and we made sure that we had the staffing in place. We had far less technical issues, and we had some great people that helped us navigate through some of the changes we had to deal with the state mandate, and we were actually able to reduce the time from application to admission compared to years past, even while we were overcoming those hurdles. So if you have any friends in the admissions office, please pat them on the back. Dr. Nye spoke to the Bridge program a few moments ago, and I have that as well. We actually had a couple things that we've tried to do. We've tried to effectively transition those students. Even though it's not up here, we had an 85% crossover from Bridge programs into full fall enrollment this year. Along with that, that's connected to some of the things we do with first year transition to give a more intensive support to our freshman students. We increased the number of contacts to freshman students by over 300%. We had roughly 6,000, 6,200, something like that, contacts with students in the previous year. And in this past year, we had roughly 19,000 individual contacts with first year students, all aimed at the goal of helping them be successful and be retained. This is on the technical side, and these are some of the things that happen oftentimes oftentimes either with IT support and combined with the registrar's office support, and some of the functional support comes directly out of the registrar's office. But that is developing what was called the advising profile and the student profile within Banner 9 upgrades. And that's basically behind the scenes things that we're doing to hopefully have the technology in front of you so that you can better serve the students and so that students can better self-serve in our system. Another thing that we've been very active on, roll the clock back a couple of years, and I'd have bet my house that there wasn't going to be a community college vote passed in the Idaho Falls area. But even before that, there were some things that we needed to do to solidify some of our partnerships with the community colleges in the state, in the region. Some of you are aware I spent 17 years of my career at a community college, and I see some of the struggles that the students have when they transition and transfer and go on to university. So we started, it started with a doctoral assistant that helped me navigate some of the more difficult things. The most unique thing that we've done is in these 2+2 partnerships with the community colleges, we actually grant catalog rights backwards. So essentially you can have Idaho State University catalog rights prior to coming to Idaho State University. That means that those students, I had one person that said, well, that's going to be much more difficult for the programs. Actually, it isn't. So if the student does a pre-prescribed program coming in, that if you change your program the same way that you dealt with your native students, you won't have to come up with a different avenue for the transfer students. They'll be able to be sort of taught out with the program changes just as you did with a native student. But the other thing it does is it alleviates the fear that faculty and students have at the community colleges that what's going to happen is they're going to study towards your catalog for 2 years, and then when they transfer, the program's going to change, and they won't be able to finish in the 2 years. Right now, we currently have roughly 50 programs in the hopper. It's a little bit different what we're doing with College of Eastern Idaho because they don't have a set of academic programs ready to transfer. So we're working with them on a programmatic level so that as they develop their programming, that we'll have 2+2s in place as they come across. We've had a lot of changes in the International Programs Office, and we've tried to reinvigorate that. One of the things that's happened is we've developed some study abroad programs, but we've also started the process of making some partnerships with some schools from overseas, and so that the students have the opportunity to essentially do an international 2+2 program. So we're excited. Hopefully that'll expand in the next year. In addition, we participate with a couple of online services that help us boost our international recruiting efforts. We're starting to see some return on that. It's It's a difficult thing to be in international recruiting right now. When you watch some of the news at night and you see some of the things like ratings on our international standing or our favorability rating or anything that limits immigration or different things like that, nobody has any solid answers, but all of us in international recruiting are just, there's some trepidation in how things moving forward make us a viable spot for students traveling overseas for their education. So with that, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to take those. Awesome, thank you so much.
Brian Hickenlooper, if you don't know who I am, your Chief Financial Officer. Just give you a little brief budget update. This last fall, we started looking at financial projections of where we thought we might be financially for this next FY19 coming up here. Through that analysis of different things, we recognized on the appropriated budget side, which is the tuition and fees and the, tuition side and appropriation side, comes into that, we'll be short about 5.7 million in tuition. And so as a discussion, we took the IAC, we've been to different groups, faculty senate, different areas. We talked about how we might maybe meet that adjustment. And again, these are preliminary numbers. We'll solidify things a little bit later this spring. Our plan was, again, we have some reserves. If you remember our plan last year, we budgeted to take from our reserves to help us with that for 1 year. We'll take another chunk of $3 million from our reserves this year, along there with then making some budget adjustments of about $2.7 million. As you may recall from last year, we asked the non-academic units to take the bulk of the load. They did about 2/3. The academic units did about 1/3 of what we made in the budget adjustments. So our target reduction areas by area this year, we flopped that. So the academic areas, we were working on $2 million, significantly lower numbers than what we had last year. We were closer to the $6-7 million total package last year versus about $3 million this year. And then the non-academic units, we got $700,000. So that's kind of preliminary where we're going. As far as the academic side, I know the deans and the areas are working on this process. The non-academic units are doing the same thing. So we'll be refining that later this spring. Any questions on budget stuff? Like I said, we'll tweak the numbers. It may not be this bad, hopefully. Yes?
Could you tell us what the state's budget is looking like? You know, so we are looking at shortfall. How is the state doing? Is it also the same, or are they just not going to give us money that they could?
Laura's going to give you a little bit of update on what the state's proposing in their budget, but overall, yeah, they have increases to their revenue stream. So yeah, they've had some influences. We will see some benefit from some of that, but we won't see enough. We won't see enough to compensate for the loss of tuition that we've had in students. And that's mainly been in the mix of the type of students. You know, you heard we've seen some increases in some areas, but the mix of the international student mix compared to our domestic students, the dollar impact of that is what's driving most of this. So, yes.
Can you speak to the FY18 numbers? You said that there was a larger amount for non-academic versus academic.
Right.
I know originally it seemed like last year it was something around 10 or 11 million, and the non-academic was bearing, I want to say something like 8 million, and the academic was 2 million. What actually happened?
Okay. So
How
the
much was actually
question
done?
for outlying areas that probably didn't hear that, what was the actual FY18 split out? We originally did, and our initial projections were that we thought we were going to need a $12 million cut, a reduction adjustment. As we looked at that further, it toned down to closer to about a $7 million adjustment. And of that, the non-academic units picked up 4 million something. The academic units, if I remember, was a little bit over, it was around 2, a little bit, somewhere in that range. I think, yeah, the academic units actually, instead of a reduction of expenses, they were able to increase some, I think it was 600,000 of new revenue to come in. So part of that adjustment of what they were doing was actually bringing new revenue, new students to the campus. So it was probably closer to about half of what we originally thought.
So the non-academic did about 4,
4,
and the
academic did about 2. Yeah.
So with this, now they're gonna be
Flip-flop.
basically even over a 2-year period, non-academic 4, academic 4, is that kind of what I'm hearing? Does that math track for you?
If I can do it in my head. You would have had, you'd have the 4 million plus the 2, oh, excuse me, 4 million plus the 7 is 4.7 million. And if you took the 2 plus the 2, it's 4. Yeah, about.
Pretty close.
Yeah, you're pretty close. Or the 2. Part of the issue was strategically, it was going to take the academic units more time to work through and look at what the programming was and some of the things they're doing to be able to make adjustments and stuff was part of it. And we, again, both years, last year as well as this year, we're still trying to be strategic and see what makes sense. We're not saying do it across the board. No, there's things that don't make sense, but try to work together. So. Anything else? Thank you. Good question. Thanks.
We should say too, that the academic units hit their revenue targets from last year. So the revenue that they said they would produce for the budget, they did. And that meant that we didn't have to have additional adjustments, which was good. And we'll have additional revenue in this 2 million as well. That a piece, probably a significant part of that 2 million, it appears from what we're seeing coming back from our units, will be met by additional revenue enhancements. And that's still under construction, but that's what we are seeing and expect to see on the academic side, which is where the revenue of the institution is produced. So a question about the state's budget. As Brian mentioned, revenue at the state level is up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the budget will reflect revenue increases to the agencies, in part because there are a number of things going on at the state level that impacts that. One of those issues is that the tax reform bill at the federal level is impacting the state revenue stream. And that's still under review, but it does look like it will have a negative impact on the state revenue stream, and that has to be compensated for. And then also at the state level, there are a number of conversations about tax reform at the state level, including the elimination of the grocery tax, and we'll have to see where that goes in this legislative cycle. The governor gave his address and his budget update is that just a week ago? It seems like a long time ago already. But it's just a week ago. Of course, that is the governor's proposal. It still has to go through the legislative process. And so what's in the governor's budget does not mean that that's what we will end up with. But certainly I wanted to highlight a few of the things that we did see that were connected to higher ed in the governor's budget. Probably the most significant of those is a proposal that the governor is making for a CEO of higher education that would report to the state board. That request is $275,000 for salary. We're hearing already that in committee that salary is coming down. And so this is a moving target. And then $500K for a consulting fee for a consultant who will come to the board office and evaluate options for business consolidation across the campuses. so across the system. And looking at business functions across the system and opportunities for consolidation of those. Creation of an Office of Workforce Development. That office has already been created. The governor's asking for funding for that office. A Idaho healthcare plan that would address the gap that Idaho has in its healthcare delivery, its healthcare insurance system. $5 million added to the Opportunity Scholarship Program. That's the state scholarship program available to students in Idaho, state residents. And that program would, in the governor's budget, also be targeted for a certain percentage of it, targeted for adult students with some college coming back to school. The governor has for 3 years now, this is the 3rd year, tried to get a scholarship for returning adult students. It hasn't done well in the legislative process. It has not been successful. And so this is, in part, an effort to do that as well. $25 million transferred to the Permanent Building Fund to support the institutions. And this is in lieu of capital requests. It's a bigger number. It's a bigger A&R number than we generally see in the governor's budget. But it's instead of our capital requests. None of the capital requests that went to the governor's office or went to the state from the institutions are in the budget, are in the governor's budget. For us, that included a health sciences building, a clinics building, that did not make it into the governor's budget. But we will see more money, potentially, for A&R here. And then a degree audit system, a statewide degree audit system that the governor is asking for $350,000 for. In a meeting of the state board committee meeting today, we got a little bit more information about that. That is intended to be an audit system that works with all of our ERP systems statewide and will allow a student to track a transcript across multiple institutions and a degree audit across multiple institutions. Employee support, there's some employee support in the governor's budget that we wanted to bring to your attention. $102 million to support the controller's office, upgrade for its own operating system. A 3% change in employee compensation. We expect this to do probably to get through the legislative process. That would be a 3% increase for state employees on appropriated dollars. The institutions would have to offset that. We would pick up the difference between the employees that are on appropriated lines and the employees that are on local money. That's about a $1.3 million bill for ISU. So we will pick that up in our budget process, $1.3 million, so that your fund source does not determine whether or not you get this 3% raise. But the state doesn't cover fund shift. So when they talk about fund shift, that's it. That's the fund shift number that the state doesn't cover. For us, this is a pretty big deal because a significant number of our faculty and staff in the Division of Health Sciences, as many of you know, are on local funds, are funded by local money. And those are the lines that we're picking up the CEC for. And then a 2-month premium holiday for employees. This is kind of interesting. The state is over budgeted in one of its reserve accounts for insurance and needs to adjust that. As a result, in the governor's budget, every employee in the state of Idaho will receive a 2-month holiday on health insurance premiums. This is like a one-time thing for 2 months, probably at the end of the cycle, if it gets through the budget cycle. And then all of the agencies are seeing a decrease as well because the state's picking up a greater part of the cost of health insurance per employee. So up to $2,000 for ISU. That's a little bit of a break for the state, but it's not real money, as Brian's about to tell me, because, so don't get too excited that we're going to have this money available for us to spend because the state's going to sweep it. So I'm not really sure how that reduces their reserve, but that is what will happen here if we get the break. Now you all will get a break, hopefully, we will all get an individual break. That money you won't have to find in another way. Just to give you an idea of what we had in the pool here, we requested occupancy costs for the Eames complex, formerly the Rise complex. And when it was the Rise complex, it wasn't eligible for occupancy because that was research space. But converting it to instructional space means it's eligible for occupancy, and we asked for it. The new buildings are eligible for occupancy as well. We are likely to get that. It was in the governor's budget for us to get that 1.3 million. There is some medical residency support in the governor's budget. You can see it here, approximately 1 million, which isn't actually not a huge number, divided amongst these agencies. Enrollment workload adjustment, I should say just a couple things about that. Enrollment workload adjustment is the state's performance process for funding institutions. It's based entirely on credit hours, and it is above the base or below the base. In other words, our entire base budget's not driven by EWA, which is good. Because we have not always been up in EWA. EWA has been replaced by the board. The board voted to replace it with outcomes-based funding that would be based on degree production, but that proposal has not made it through the process, and as a result, the legislature is still operating under the EWA framework, which is based on credit hours. ISU is up this year, so we're up in credit. We're up in the EWA calculation, which is 3-year rolling average, weighted, and so we're likely to get this 590, whatever it is, 568, hopefully. We're one of only 2 institutions up in EWA. The other one is Boise State. And the others are likely to be held harmless, but we'll see what happens. A couple of items for community colleges here, $10 million for CWI's Health and Science Building, and $5 million to the College of Eastern Idaho for its conversion. We have a legislative affairs director, Kent Kuntz, who some of you know, who spends his time this time of year in these legislative meetings, and he's tracking all of this very closely and letting us know what is likely to happen. The Governor's Task Force on Higher Education. This is important because the Governor's Task Force recommendations have been accepted by the State Board of Ed, and they are in the process of being implemented across the system in Idaho. And so I thought it might be important just to run through these quickly so that you all can see what they are. Number 1, efficiencies, cost savings, and service. That's tied to the higher ed CEO request and the consolidation of business functions. They plan on restating the 60% goal. That's the state's attainment goal. Structural change and system improvements, guided pathways. And that is a pathway proposal to make it easier for students to get through the educational system. Improved certificate and degree completion, a statewide digital delivery system that we don't know very much about yet, but would be managed by the State Board of Ed and would allow students to complete degrees online using classes from any of our institutions, and we will certainly keep you posted on that. Increased funding for scholarships, the outcomes-based funding model that we are likely to see in this year, and the Governor's Workforce Development Task Force recommendations, those that were a separate task force. A competency-based system, which I would argue we already have because we have gone through a credit for prior learning process at all the institutions, and it's available for students where applicable. Additional partnerships with industry, and workforce training toward degree or certificate completion. One of the outcomes of the higher ed task force meetings has been a focus at the state level on gen ed common course numbering. We sort of got away from this in the last 10 years because we moved toward outcomes-based gen ed, gem stamping process, but we have been directed by the state board that certain courses will retain their common course number. Most of these already have a common course number statewide, and we've been directed to hold those common course numbers and to ensure that they maintain their gem stamping as well. If you have questions about this, Joanne Tokel is our gen ed person, and she can help answer those questions. But certainly we're still waiting for additional information about this. But I wanted to bring it to your attention. It will impact some of you who have courses that are on that list. Just a reminder that the institutions all come before the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee every year to make the case for our general fund appropriation. That's the general fund money that comes to the institution that supports instruction primarily. And it is about 80 million right now. And so it's an important component of our budget. It's about 25 to 27%, depending on revenue, of our total budget. So we will be talking about that next week in front of the JFAC committee and also in front of the House and Senate Ed committees. And they ask very pointed questions about retention and graduation rates and degree attainment, and we don't expect, hopefully, fireworks at this effort. Darren's going to give us a quick update on strategic planning.
Let the excitement begin. I know this is what you've been waiting for. That's why you came here today. Thanks for being here today, Laura. It's appreciated, but this is what they actually want to know about. So we just got through with our mid-cycle accreditation report. The mid-cycle accreditation comes every 3 years. It focuses on mission fulfillment and assessment. And I'm proud to say that we got through this fairly unscathed, but there are still some initiatives that we have to conduct in order to finish it off. The purpose of this slide is to explain the difference between mission fulfillment to you and what a strategic plan is, because the two are very commonly misunderstood. And I'm not just talking at any level, I'm talking at the NWCCU. We have to explain it to them once in a while. What mission fulfillment is what we do. It's our 4 core themes. Everybody remembers those, right? We have those 4 core themes, and that's what we focus on as an organization. That's our grass, okay? It has a sprinkler system, it's nice and pretty green, we have to go out there and mow it every week, we have some shrubs around it, we take and fertilize it, we make sure it's always kept right and continues to grow and looks right. A strategic plan, it focuses specifically on a 3 to 5 year program, okay? A series of advancements that you want to make to that area that you're working in. So if you think about it, it's like adding a deck to your backyard. So not only do you get to take care of that beautiful lawn, but you also have to plan that deck out. You have to put resources to it in addition to doing what you're normally doing with your yard, and then you actually have to maintain it. So our strategic planning process right now, we completed the strategic plan for ISU in last March. It got approved by the State Board of Education in June and was adopted by the university in July. We are 6 months into it right now. So our deck is built, but it's not painted. We haven't sealed it yet, and we have some more work to do on it, because you can't just say it's done just because you have a strategic plan. You have to have the initiatives that go along with it. Is there any questions on the difference between a mission fulfillment, the university completing those 4 core themes, and what a strategic plan does? The initiatives that you're taking to focus on those specific areas within the university that need some additional assistance, or that will help that book even better. So this is our mission fulfillment dashboard. This was created out of IR, and they did a fantastic job on it, and you're going to see a lot of green on there, right? Well, when we created the benchmarks for that, I worked with each of the subcommittees, the IEAC subcommittees, to identify what those benchmarks should be. Well, in many cases, we exceeded those benchmarks already. And so we're going to have to go back and realign those benchmarks and look at those to ensure that they're actually charging us to do better. We've got it, you always want to grow. If you're at 100%, if you're over at the edge there, then guess what? You're not working hard enough. Because there's always room for improvement, right? And those that are below, that are in the gray, because it works off of the gray, red, amber, green program, and then gray is below 80%. Our goal is to hit 80%, minimum of 80%. You're going to see 3 areas that aren't. Well, that's just because those are new to the university, and it's some of the first years that we've actually been tracking those. So our benchmarks may be a little too high, or the initiatives aren't quite off the ground yet to meet that requirement. And we have 5 years to accomplish that. So it's nothing to be scared of that we're falling below that 80%, but we need to work harder in those areas to measure those as well as complete the initiatives to support them. Others you can see like 311% in core theme 3 or 4. That's because we have one core theme that was actually measured accurately this year from the last 3 years. We had 12 site visits and community visits that we were measuring before, and we went to 68. So we had to do, what we're doing is we adjusted it to increase those to 84 over that 68. So it's basically a 25% increase over the next 5 years. Or 50%, I'm sorry. No, it's 25% increase over the next 5 years. So as we look at these, we'll adjust them. This is not available to, just because it's on the IR website, but if you ever want to see this, you just have to give us a holler at Institutional Effectiveness and our IR, and we can drop this for you anytime you want to see it. There's nothing secret about it. It's just we can't get it open because it's editable to everybody if we do that. And we're working on purchasing a new assessment software for the university as a whole. And part of that focuses on mission fulfillment and strategic planning. So we're going to transition from what you just saw to that new assessment software as soon as we get that purchased over the next 6 months. So just so you know, strategic plan update, these are 3 of the 5 objectives, the first 3 that we picked that we're working on. We're going to focus, of course, we're going to focus on increasing recruiting. Of course, we're going to focus on retention. And of course, we're going to focus on marketing. Those are the 3 big ones that always stand out to any university. So it's not really a exciting strategic plan to capture your imagination and make you want to dance on tables, but it is really down hard in the weeds, and we're seeing some advancement in that through the action plans that we're creating, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. Number 4 and 5, 4 is kind of unique because that's definitely internal, and it's working on our communication internally. So we're going to make sure that we focus on transparency and inclusion, specifically administration, and as well as at the dean's level. And then number 5 focuses on community partnerships, and how we work within all the communities, the service community that we support. So it's not just Pocatello, not just Meridian, or Idaho Falls or Twin Falls, but it's our entire service region, which includes all of northeastern Idaho, north central Idaho, and then down to Mountain Home. So you have been very busy because many of the people I'm looking at in here have been part of this process. We've created project action teams that started last March, and we have focused on creating action plans to support these strategic initiatives. And the reason we did this is so that we have a university-wide effort at first, but we're also going to look at what you at your level and what your college deans and the departments are going to be focused on, and align those efforts with what you saw those 5 strategic objectives were. So just so you know, that these are the 6 objectives that you see up here, action plans, focus around all of the objectives except for number 4. And the reason number 4 is not identified in there is because we're going to wait until the new president comes on board so he or she can set the tone for what they want to measure in that regard and are there up front to help us implement that. That number 4 is a 3-year objective, so we can shift that one way or the other as long as we meet it by year 5. So say we have 6 action plans that are going forward. We've already started actually implementing some of these and working on improving the plans. Number 1, for example, there is the facilities is working with enrollment management and student affairs to reorganize the student union building, to create a welcome center so the students know where to go when they walk in, instead of walking in the front door or the back door, not having a clue where they're trying to find. So that's our first one. The realigning the student advising, that started already. You heard Scott talk about that, and that is under process. We should have some, we're going to go all the way to the faculty level on that. And those policies and procedures are going to be help define who talks to students when and where and how. And we really, one of the focuses that really had was to focus on faculty involvement with those students, because retention is one of our, there's no sense bringing them in the front door if you're going to lose them out the back. And the number one thing that students want is faculty interaction. They don't want to necessarily talk to somebody who doesn't have specific understanding of what they want to go into for their degree. They want to hear from you. So we're working with Scott's group to develop that and work with the faculty. That was actually a faculty-led initiative. The Reviewing the Academic Skills 104, pretty simple. Scott's working on that as well with his group. Stuart is working on a centralized marketing plan. So each college has a marketing rep, right? And we have a centralized marketing organization. Well, the two don't always necessarily talk well. So what we're doing is Stuart is building a master plan with them so that everybody's on the same sheet of music. We're going to do a survey, community survey, and when I mean community, it's probably going to be a statewide survey about how people know or feel about ISU. And then once we identify where those weaknesses are, we're going to create opportunities out of it and create marketing plan. The Bengal Business Directory is something that's going to start here in Southeast Idaho, and what's going to happen with that is we're going to identify those businesses that are Bengal friendly, they're going to create an app, and then anytime a student, faculty member, staff member walks in with that app, pushes the button, shows them that they belong to ISU, they'll get some type of discount or assistance or free item, whatever it may be. So they're working on that out of Kent Tinney's office. We have 2 additional action plans that are under development right now. Those should be done in the middle of February, and we can move forward to the president and the IAC with those. And then finally, the colleges should be aligning their strategic plans to the ISU strategic plan, which is not too difficult because, again, we hit the basic 5 of what we should be doing as an organization. Okay, I am not reading this, I promise. I just wanted to give you a heads up. We have to align our strategic plan to what the State Board of Education does as well. So what you're seeing here are their goals and objectives, and we align all of ours to what they do, and we report those on an annual basis. Our report's due here in March. Even though we only have 6 months worth of data for our strategic plan implemented, we will have some minor changes. But I just want to show you, this is all available online to you. It'll be posted on there, or you can go to the State Board website if you choose to as well. But you can see all those innovation and economic development focuses on our objective number 5. Data-informed decision-making, they're talking about data access and transparency, same thing for our number 4. Educational system, quality teaching workforce alignment, coordination. This focuses a little bit outside of our area, but still we're trying to always take care of ensuring we do that alignment. So do you make a copy of this one? Okay, so one of the things that we did next, as you well know, that last year the legislature approved the Polytech Initiative up in Idaho Falls. There was an executive committee formed, and I'll show you those individuals in just a minute who that was, but that executive committee came together and identified the starting elements to get this rolling. And the first thing that they did was create a vision statement for the Polytech. By doing that, they have a direction of where they want to go. So it's not just a 5-year vision. They can change this vision at any time once they get rolling through this. But they had to have a starting system for some type of focus. From that, they created a mission statement. The mission statement only focuses on what they're going to do to transition themselves into a valuable asset to the community and the educational system within Idaho Falls. They really tried to focus this group on not only what educational things we can do, but what partnerships we can create as an organization, whether that be industry, other educational institutions, or governmental institutions. So the subcommittee, right now, after they got done with this, they have 2 additional subcommittees, and those subcommittees are now working to identify the academic programs that they want to offer within the first year at the Polytech Initiative. And eventually that they want to turn that into a full-blown Polytech organization with hiring 9 to 10 faculty, which are they're already looking at they've already hired 2 individuals temporarily for 1-year contracts, but they've got 2 nuclear engineer faculty and 2 computer science faculty with searches underway right now. They also hired an administrative assistant and a 2x2 rep for College of Eastern Idaho. And this is your Polytech Steering Committee. There's a lot of people on it. You get about a 70% attendance rate because some of these are from, if you see a lot of INL representation, they rotate through depending upon who can be there for those meetings. But you'll notice we have U of I in there, CEI, INL, and then the deans have representatives there or attending themselves. Selena Grace, the vice provost, is the project sponsor, and Lyle Castle, the dean of COSI, is the chair right now. So if you have any questions concerning what they're doing or how they're moving forward, those are the individuals to speak with.
We recognize this is a lot of material that we're just providing. And so if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to contact me, any of our staff in the Provost's office. We can certainly answer those questions. I wanted to give you an update on our dean searches. We have 3 dean searches going right now. They are all in process. The College of Science and Engineering search, I want to thank those of you who are here that are on that committee. That committee's worked very hard now for a number of months and has whittled its pool, and it should be announcing in the next, probably the next month or so. I'm looking, a few weeks, looking at George. Less time than that. It's public candidates. It's getting closer to that level. We have an outside search consultant firm that's helping us with the COSI dean search. We have a College of Education search. We have the chair of that committee here. Both of you are here. Joanne and Alan Franz and Joanne Tokel. So if you have questions about that process, which is also going through, getting ready for its confidential interviews right now, and it should be public relatively soon also. School of Nursing. School of Nursing is in the process of hiring a dean, and those interviews are happening some of those interviews are happening now, which is why our Vice President for Health Sciences is, I don't think, here, because he was in interviews for the Dean of Nursing search. So we expect all 3 of these searches to wrap up within the next month or so. I also wanted to give you an update, it's not on the agenda here, on the Vice President for Student Affairs search. We're very happy to announce that Lynn Reddington, and that announcement went out yesterday, Lynn Reddington has accepted that job as the Vice President for Student Affairs. Her start date is July 1. She's already been to campus and met with staff in her area. She is, I think, still here this week, actually, and has been meeting with people and excited to get moving on that. So we are happy to welcome her as well. That's a lot to cover. I do want to just emphasize that it's an exciting time in Idaho higher education. We have a lot of transition happening, but we also have a lot of very positive attention to higher education, even though some of this attention may feel like it's a negative. a lot of it is aimed at trying to expand opportunity, trying to expand access, and the good news is that our product is still in very high demand, and that there is a lot of interest and support, and that comes with a lot of accountability as well. And I am very confident that we will have a good story to tell when we're in front of the legislature, that we are making good progress on our measures. As Darren noted, we have too much green on our charts. Actually, we're doing very well on our indicators, on our strategic plan, and certainly we can provide you with that specific information if you are interested in it. But in the big picture, while this is certainly a time of change and some disruption in higher education, it's also a time of opportunity, and ISU is in a better position to take advantage of that than a lot of institutions, because we have already had a lot of change, and because we've already had a lot of programs that are non-traditional in how they approach students. And so we're a long ways down this road already. Now, one of the things I promised you when we started these forums is that I would not keep you for more than an hour, and we just done that today. And that is comes with my apology. So the formal part of this is going to end now because I don't want to keep you too long at these forums. We will, if we have updates, have another one later in this semester. We'll see what happens with the budget at the state level and the CEO position, which we're hearing a little bit more about, and certainly we'll keep you posted about that as well. But I will stay here for questions for some of you who probably have questions, and I'll be here for at least another half hour to answer those. So I appreciate your attendance, and I appreciate all of the hard work that you are all doing, and it is our commitment to keep you informed of these things that are happening. So feel free to contact us at any time, and thank you.